Welcome back to another episode of the Clean Techies podcast, where we interview climate tech founders and VCs to discuss all things building and investing to solve the biggest challenge of our generation, climate change. Today, we have a really exciting conversation, and I know I say that almost every time, but today is a bit different. Why, you might ask? Well, I believe we had the chance to speak with someone who has invented a technology that will be considered as one of the greatest innovations in building materials in this century, perhaps even this millennia. I know it sounds a little bit exaggeratory, but I'm very, very excited. Today we spoke with Cody Finke, the co-founder and CEO of Brimstone. They have invented a third method of creating Portland cement. And for those unaware, Portland cement is the cement engineers will specify when engineering buildings. They will rarely veer from this given the potential risks of using other unproven concretes and cements. This cement accounts for about 5% of global emissions, and Brimstone has developed a carbon neutral and in some cases carbon negative method of creating cement that they believe at scale will be at cost parity with current conventional cement prices. This conversation covers everything from his journey into climate, how he started the company, experience fundraising and some of the insights around that area, as well as advice to founders on hiring and developing DeepTech. Really an incredible episode. I'm very glad to have had the opportunity to speak with Cody and nerd out about concrete at least a little bit. Hopefully this episode will cement your excitement for concrete. Enjoy the episode. All right, welcome to the show, Cody. How's it going?
Yeah, thanks, Silas. It's going quite well. How are you doing?
I am fine as frog hair. I'm excited to have you on. Really ready to nerd out about concrete and cement a little bit. Would love really excited to have you on, to be honest with you. So
Yeah,
we had a kind of an internal debate with some of my colleagues this week about how concrete and cement are super exciting to us. Well, some of the other people were like, nah, I don't know. I don't know how you get excited about that.
yeah. I think most people are in the I don't know how to get excited about that camp, but I'm with you. It's
Yeah,
a exciting part to think about.
I think it's super fascinating. So let's start off just by giving a quick intro to yourself and who you are, and kind of you can tie into that how you ended up getting into climate.
Yeah. So yeah, my name's Cody Finke. I'm the co-founder of a company called Brimstone, and as we've alluded to here, Brimstone is working on eliminating greenhouse gas emissions from the production of cement. And sure, we'll get into this, but cement, of course, is responsible for about 5.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's pretty similar to cars, right? Cars are something like 6.5%. Um, so uh, it might be hard to get excited about cement and concrete, but if you can get excited about the quantity of CO2 emissions that cars or eliminating those emissions from cars, you could probably get excited about eliminating the CO2 emissions from cement. Um, yeah, and then sorry, you wanted a
Yeah,
background how I got into climate?
yeah, I'm curious about your background and kind of how you ended up specifically getting into climate, and maybe in particular, were you always a fan of trying to solve the concrete issue, or did that kind of come by accident?
Yeah, I certainly wasn't a fan of that, but I'll get to that. Yeah, so I guess my professional background is I'm a chemist by training, right? That's what I did my undergraduate work in, and then I went and got a PhD in environmental science and engineering, where I worked on primarily electrochemistry. And to get to your point, I was not always excited about cement and concrete. I started out working on wastewater treatment for applications in low-income countries. And then I moved on to water electrolysis to make clean hydrogen. And then I moved on to working on the fertilizer problem. And specifically greenhouse gas emissions associated with producing fertilizer. And then ultimately moved to cement. But I think like my sort of interest in working on climate and environmental issues started a long time before that. I think the first time I started trying to solve something is, so I grew up in Seattle, right? And just like I've always been just thought outdoors and mountain climbing and all that kind of stuff was super cool. And I would look up at Mount Rainier, and that was, you know, the coolest thing ever. And I learned from going to An Inconvenient Truth, with like Al Gore's movie, which was, back when I was a freshman or sophomore in high school, um, that those glaciers on Mount Rainier, which I thought was so cool, were threatened. I was like, that's devastating. Now I've realized that there are maybe more important impacts than the glaciers on Mount Rainier, although that is still devastating. Um, but yeah, after that, I like started like environmental club in my high school, and I started a compost program. I would uh, personally rebag and take out compost bins in my high school for 3 years in high school every day, or was it every day? Maybe it was every other day. I think it was every other day. And yeah, that was sometimes a little convenient because if I was hungry and there was some perfectly good food in there, I would do a little dumpster diving. Uh, but yeah, what um, wasn't really uh, specifically focused on any one area. I just was concerned about climate in general. And as I went through school and into graduate school, I became really interested in sort of these orphan problems, right? Like these huge environmental problems that folks aren't really working on. So the first one, of course, was wastewater treatment, and then got very interested in, of course, that fertilizer problem, and then eventually cement. And what, a statistic that I know now that like kind of distills it, right, is that um, if you look at dollars invested in decarbonization per ton of greenhouse gas emissions, right? If you look at transportation, it's like 14 or $15 invested. And if you look at cement, it's like 1 penny, right? So it is a problem that is huge, and it's a problem that is rarely worked on. And that's kind of exactly where I want to be, one of the things that interests me the most.
Hey there. Quick break to remind any founders or VCs listening, if you are looking for deal flow, seeking to raise funding, looking for partners to help service your needs, or perhaps you're looking for corporate investment partners, feel free to reach out to us through our Slack channel, which can be found in the description. Because we meet a lot of people in this space, we set aside time each week to make introductions to the various people that we encounter. This is something we do free of charge in order to help these incredible companies solving climate change to scale. Looking forward to hearing from you in the Slack channel. So, that's, by the way, very fascinating and kind of sad to hear. But how did you particularly choose chemistry as a focus for study because you wanted to solve climate solutions, or did you just like, hey, I'm interested in this, and then you found your way into it? I'm kind of curious about the decision making process since kind of climate was an important thing to you all the way back in high school.
Yeah, so I've been really psyched on science ever since, starting, I mean, far back I can remember. It just it made a lot more sense to me than I guess like humanities or something like that. It just sort of matched the way that my brain thinks. Um, and I was, sort of broadly interested. I took a lot of, biology, physics, and chemistry related courses all throughout, high school and college. And I kind of found as I got like more advanced in the coursework uh, that my interest really focused on chemistry. And a friend of mine, kind of Ian McKay, put it in I think a way that really resonates with me, right? Like for different people, um, there's going to be, we can work on things and learn things, and we can, work to a level where we can understand things. And if you pull it back a little bit from like the limit of our understanding, is like a zone where you can be creative. And I felt like um, with chemistry for me, I felt like in all my advanced coursework, like I was really in a zone where I could be creative when I was studying chemistry. Whereas I felt like um, so the other sciences like either biology or physics, I was pushing up on my limit of understanding. So just I'm not sure exactly what the deal is, but how my brain works is like chemistry just clicked with me in a different way. But I really saw, and I still see, that there were tools in really any discipline that you can use to work on a lot of really important problems. Right, when I was first studying chemistry and a lot of other stuff, a lot of biology and physics too. Um, I was also interested in, HIV vaccines. I won a scholarship for a research program on developing like an HIV vaccine. But and I don't, who knows if it would have worked. I didn't end up doing anything on it. But you know, a lot of these there's a lot of really interesting, important problems out there, and I think I could have been happy working on a lot of different ones. Yeah, climate. I didn't specifically go into chemistry because of climate. I went into chemistry because it felt the most exciting to me, and I applied that to climate problems. I think you can apply anything to climate problems, really.
Hey there. Are you building a climate tech business and looking for very specialized talent? Consider reaching out to our sponsors, NextWave Partners. NextWave are experts in talent acquisition, recruitment, and retention across the climate tech, renewables, and ESG spaces globally. So if your team is growing or you're looking to make a career change yourself, feel free to reach out to NextWave at next-wavepartners.com or reach out to one of their consultants directly via their LinkedIn page. Mm-hmm. Yeah, as it so happens, an area to study that's extremely important, right? Chemistry is like a really huge. There's so many solutions that can come out of it, so it's really fascinating. I'm kind of curious, when did you decide that you wanted to be an entrepreneur and build things? Did it just come to you that you're like, hey, like there's no other companies I can work for in this space that are doing this, that I have to do it myself, or was it something you always wanted to do?
Yeah, I did not grow up wanting to be an entrepreneur, and it was pretty recent before I started the company. So when I was working on this wastewater treatment system for applications in low income countries in the early days of grad school, and that was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the Gates Foundation, they did a lot of coaching of us as graduate students, and one of the things that they would talk about, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that there's you know in the global economic system we have, which is basically capitalism, there's sort of two ways to go about changing things. So the first is you would go try to change the global economic system, right? And you could do that in relatively minor ways by like trying to figure out taxes or policies that work within the constraints of the system we have, or you could try to overhaul it completely. Or you could try to start a company and have that company produce a product where the value over cost ratio is higher than what existed before. And you can change things that way. And I think both are great ways to work on to change things. Like I think everyone needs to look at the skills and abilities that they have, and I don't have any political inclination or understanding of politics, so like going the political route seemed complicated. So I ultimately said, okay, well, starting or going through companies seems like a way that matched my skills, which is like chemist. I can think about just building processes or things that could do chemistry. But I would say that the actually starting the business took a little bit longer. So I became comfortable with the idea that like businesses were the way that things changed if you maybe were a scientist that built things. But I thought like, oh well, maybe I could be a researcher and like put a bunch of things out there. But one of the things that I realized is that no one cares as much about the thing that you invented, right? Except for the person who invented it. And more importantly, like what you invent is almost certainly not actually that good, right? It needs to be changed quite a bit. So going yourself, I think that going yourself through the scale up process and engineering process is really important to making sure that, or having the best chance of making an impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. No, I think that is interesting to hear. You had to come to the realization that it was time to go take the reins and go for it. One thing I'm kind of curious is, so far, what would you say has been your biggest difficulty as a founder from a skills perspective, and how you've solved it? Like, how have you kind of closed the gap on that?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, like I'm really interested in solving big global problems like um, climate and for example, or is what I work on, so cement. I'm the steps in order that are necessary to do that sometimes seem a little bit confusing, right? Um, so for example, like one of the things you have to do is you have to get money from investors, and getting money from investors involves trying to convince groups that already have quite a bit of money that um,
they're going to make a lot more money. And this sort of intermediate step just never felt like a very exciting problem for me. I don't really care about trying to figure out how to maximize the money of an organization that already has a lot of money, right? I care about climate. So, I understand that it's necessary, if you're going to do, in the system that we have, if you're going to use private business to solve big problems, and we all need access to capital, and to get access to capital, you need to, figure out ways for the folks that have capital to make a lot of money so that they give you their capital. But it's just like that was often a fairly boring aspect of the job for me, because just like I just didn't really feel like I was solving a problem. But I had to like get into a new mindset of like, well, this is not necessarily a problem, but it is a necessary step on trying to solve the problem that's really of interest. So yeah, that took a lot of growth. It kind of started in graduate school, where I was like, you know, initially trying to be like, okay, well, this technology works. Like, can't we just start a business around it, and like people will pay a bit more and it'll be fine? And I realized, well, actually, no. Like, in fact, people need to pay a lot less, because not only does the process need to be need to make folks money, that the amount of money that folks need to make needs to be adjusted for the risk of a new process. So it's definitely been a lot of growth, being able to think about these problems, and I've gotten to the point where I almost enjoy it as much as like a step in anything else.
Yeah, I think it's super important. It is sometimes I've seen with recruitment some of the technical engineers and folks that I work with, they just don't have the patience for the commercial, not because they can't do it, but because like this seems stupid, right? Like I'd rather work on something else more interesting, right? So it's interesting that you kind of had to learn that and get up to speed on that. So let's kind of shift a little bit to talk let's talk a little bit of specifics about what you're doing with Brimstone. Um, with in mind that most of us are not chemists, so give us an explanation that we could kind of go to our grandma and explain later tonight. Hey there. Are you building a climate tech business and looking for very specialized talent? Consider reaching out to our sponsors, NextWave Partners. NextWave are experts in talent acquisition, recruitment, and retention across the climate tech, renewables, and ESG spaces globally. So if your team is growing or you're looking to make a career change yourself, feel free to reach out to NextWave at next-wavepartners.com or reach out to one of their consultants directly via their LinkedIn page.
Totally, yeah. I have explained this to my grandma. She's quite a sharp woman, but she is not a chemist. So I'll try my best to replicate that. Um, so I'll start with how cement is conventionally produced, right? So far in history, cement has been made via two processes. Okay, so the first process, which is today the dominant process, by far the dominant process, it's called the dry process, and you start with a rock called limestone, and um, you need to get the calcium out of that limestone, because cement is ultimately made out of calcium. And in limestone, that calcium is bonded to CO2, carbon dioxide. So you have to heat up that limestone, that drives off the CO2 from the limestone, and then you can manipulate the calcium and turn it into ordinary Portland cement, which is what cement is. That's the cement we use. It's called ordinary Portland cement. Okay, so that's the first process. That's the one that's responsible for 5.5% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. The second process that we don't really do too much anymore is you make ordinary Portland cement from gypsum, right? That's a rock that also has calcium in it, but that calcium instead is bonded to sulfate. So in order to get that calcium, you have to burn off the sulfate, which makes either smog forming sulfur dioxide or sulfuric acid. And we used to use that process when we didn't have a better way to make sulfuric acid. Now we have a better way to make sulfuric acid, so we don't use that process anymore, because sulfuric acid is not a very nice thing to use to leave as a waste product. So anyway, those are the sort of the two ways that cement has been made in the past. What we at Brimstone we did is we have invented a third way to make ordinary Portland cement. So we use a different rock, neither gypsum nor limestone. We use what's called a calcium silicate rock. And instead of it has calcium in it, just like gypsum and limestone, but instead of being bonded to either carbon dioxide or sulfuric acid, our rock, the calcium is bonded to silicates. And it turns out that silicates are another ingredient in cement. Right? So it's a pretty convenient thing for it to be bonded to. So we do a chemical process, we separate out the calcium, we concentrate it, we recombine it with some of the silicate, and then our process produces ordinary Portland cement. And it does not form any, global warming or acid forming gases because there's none of those in the rock to start with. What it does form instead is actually a magnesium compound. It's typically magnesium hydroxide, or not important, I guess, if you're not a chemist. But those magnesium compounds will passively sequester CO2. So just sitting in air, they'll react with CO2 in the air to form magnesium carbonates. And magnesium carbonates are permanently stored CO2. And what that means is our process is actually carbon negative, right? It instead of emitting CO2 from the rock sucks CO2 in. So for a wide range of energy sources, that makes our process, net carbon negative, which is awesome because we don't necessarily have to wait for clean energy to be available everywhere in the world before we can scale and still be carbon negative. So we can that's allows us to be fast, which is really great. And then also, recently, a couple weeks ago now, we announced some news where we had a third party actually certify our cement as ordinary Portland cement. So now we officially have invented the third process to make ordinary Portland cement, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's probably a huge point. So we can skip ahead to this. I wanted to talk about that at some point. So are you referring to the C150 certification? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So I wanted to just ask I would be curious to understand. I don't think it's going to be necessarily extremely helpful unless there's other people trying to do this exact thing, but from a regulatory perspective, like what were the, general kind of key things that you had to go through and what was that process like to get to that point? I would be really curious to hear your experience.
Yeah, so I'd love to share, and let me just start with a little bit of the theory and background about why we're doing it this way. So, when we started, we always try to use frameworks, and we try to develop a like what we thought needed to be true in order to decarbonize cement quickly. Like when we say quickly, we mean just like on a time scale that's relevant for avoiding the worst effects of climate change. And there's some great pathways laid out by the IPCC. And we looked at, you could basically take one of two strategies. You could either try to make something that's better than ordinary Portland cement, or you could try to make ordinary Portland cement. And, people have been trying to make something that's better than ordinary Portland cement for a long time. And there have been regulatory standards that allow for the use of these alternative cements, many of which are lower zero carbon. And those regulatory standards have existed for something like 30 years, right? ASTM C150 is an example of one. But still, basically nobody uses that type of cement. And we thought that was curious, right? So we talked to structural engineers, and what we learned was, if you're a structural engineer and you're specifying the cement in a building, you really don't want that building to fall down. Right? And if it falls down, a lot of people could be injured or die. You'll lose a lot of money, right? It'd be a really, really bad thing. So it's something you really, really want to avoid. And you have, okay, that's what you want to avoid. You have a choice, right? Then you could either use the exact same cement that's always been used to build buildings, that's ordinary Portland cement, or you could use a new material, which maybe is lower carbon or higher strength or something like that. And the reality is there are unknown unknowns, and we don't know exactly how that new material would perform. So structural engineers do not want to specify a new material, regardless of the standard. So we said, okay, we don't want to make a new material. We want to make the exact same material. So we said, okay, we believe in order to decarbonize cement quickly, you need to make ordinary Portland cement. So then we looked around and we said, where's all the calcium in the world? Because that's what you need to make ordinary Portland cement. And it was in 3 places: limestone, gypsum, and silicate rocks. Folks had made cement out of limestone and gypsum before. They'd never made cement out of silicate rocks. So that's what we did. And what the certification process involved really was like reinventing the entire process, right? We had to start with a new starting material. Nearly all the unit operations are different. So it was a lot of modeling, a lot of theory, a ton of lab work. The scientists and engineers that work for Brimstone spent a ton of hours sort of getting the process that worked on paper to work in the lab. And then we had to produce enough to for the test. And the test, mind you, right, is geared for giant cement plants. So it's a test that's done routinely. Every time a batch is made in a cement plant, they'll do this test to make sure that the cement is up to specification. But because it's geared for giant cement plants, it requires sort of a lot of material, right? So we had to spend a long time at a pretty early stage of the company gathering that material to send off for testing, and producing it in lab scale equipment to be confident that we actually did make what we were intending to make. And the good news is the answer is yes, we can make it, which is pretty exciting. And what we feel it means is like we've now shown that there is a credible pathway to decarbonize all of cement production, not just a fraction of cement production that might be replaced with a different material. It's really all of cement production that we could now decarbonize, which is pretty cool.
I mean, that's amazing, right? That's you've removed all the barriers to entry, right? So just out of curiosity, like I want to get the very honest answer. Are there any other companies who have actually come up with this process yet, or is this totally like completely new?
This is completely new. Yeah. So and it's a good whenever we think that, we like to do a little sanity check and figure out, well, why would that be? Right. And the real answer is because it gets into a pretty interesting part of the cement world. So to make cement, what you actually have to do is you need to mix the ordinary Portland cement that comes out of a cement plant with something called supplementary cementitious materials. And supplementary cementitious materials today are the waste product from burning coal. So typically it's fly ash, which is burning coal in a coal-fired power plant, right? Place make coal-fired electricity. But you can also get it from primary steel production and that sort of thing. And that's how we make cement that has the wonderful properties that you can build skyscrapers out of. But the production of fly ash and or these supplementary cementitious materials has slowed over the last several decades as we've thankfully transitioned away from coal. And what that means is the cement industry has run into problems sourcing this material, and it's one of the reasons why cement has gotten more expensive. Well, it turns out that silicate rock that we make cement out of, what's left behind, and passes the other ASTM standard for cement, which is C618, which specifies supplementary cementitious materials, which means that our process is actually a source for both ordinary Portland cement and supplementary cementitious materials. And if supplementary cementitious materials were abundant, then our process would probably be too expensive. But because they're not abundant, right, because of this transition away from coal, our process, we believe, would be lower cost at scale. And we think that other folks had not invented this because they, had grown up in a world where supplementary cementitious materials were abundant enough.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore there wasn't a lot of motivation to work on this. And we kind of had the right idea at the right time.
Yeah. It's just very fascinating because if it is it's very hard for people, like as a recruiter, sometimes I work with companies where I'm forced to say, like, I'm pretty sure this is the only technology in the world. And you always hate saying that because you're like, what if I'm wrong? Like, what if somebody else does actually have this? But it is true, right? A lot of things have been invented and have been the first technology, right? I'm sure, of course, there'll be many copycats to follow in the quick succession, but It is really cool. Like, so congrats on that. That's obviously really, really huge. I
Yeah,
am
thanks.
curious. There's a lot of things I'd like to ask, but I think perhaps the next question would be, what is the business model that you guys have settled on? How do you have what are you focused on how to make money? What steps are next to really get to that process?
Yeah, it's another great question. Because making money is important, and it's we're not going to scale. What I've learned, right, is we're not going to scale quickly unless we make money, and really unless we make our product for the same value, right? We still make the same cement, but for a lower price point. Um, so what that we've done a lot of research, and the conventional cement companies that make all the cement today, in general, they are appropriately risk averse. Like, their business works really, really well, and they don't want to um, put a lot of money into an R&D program with unclear results. So we think that the best way to um, you know interact with all the big cement companies will be to scale our process completely, as in build a completely full scale plant. Um, and that'll take, it'll take a few scale up. We're, working on a pilot plant right now, and then we're going to build a first commercial plant, which will be subscale, and then we'll later build a full scale plant. And once we build a full scale plant, like, the risk factor will sort of go away, and we'll have lots of options, right? We could, license technologies to existing producers, where it's appropriate. And I hope that, that will happen a lot. We could joint venture, that's commonly done, or, where there's, no interested party, we could build, own, and operate ourselves. And, we're kind of going to decide based on what's the most attractive business case at the time. But we're really clear that you have to build a full scale plant in order to get
Mhm.
there.
So essentially, just to like reiterate that, what you're going to do is through the funding you've raised or next rounds, et cetera, will build and demonstrate that this is possible on a commercial scale the same way it already is being used, and that from that point you've basically de-risked other companies saying, okay, here's the instruction manual for us to go build one of those plants ourselves, and then we'll just pay you a licensing fee. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And what is it like trying to build those kind of the pilot plants? Do you have to find a partner to work with? Are you funding it off of the balance? Do you have find a partner who's like really interested, or a corporate who wants to try to see if they can get this to work too? I'm really curious because there's been many models that people have followed for the pilot projects.
Yeah. So for us, we're finding that our pace and interest are driving this fastest on our own. Um, so we raised enough venture capital funds to build the pilot plant on our own balance sheet, and that's really important because because we are the first to invent this process, and we have a lot of very valuable intellectual property associated with that. By building it ourselves, that ensures us our ability to maintain ownership of our intellectual property, which is the biggest value creator at Brimstone. So that's a really important strategy given where our value is.
That's really interesting. I guess I never considered that. Somebody else might try to lay claim, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay, interesting. And then so with the fact that you've gotten this announcement recently, what is it like? Can you walk us through the funding process for the startup, right? How did it start? Where'd you get the money from? And then what were the big milestones? And then when you hit this recent one, did VCs just come banging on the door saying we want in kind of thing?
Yeah. So it all started. So founded the company with my co-founder Hugo. We both were at Caltech at the time. And our first funding came from a couple grants from Caltech. I think in total we got $50,000 for R&D, and then another $50,000, and then through like the Caltech Office of Technology Transfer, and then another $50,000 grant from the Caltech Rocket Fund. Um, and that allowed us to sort of start our research. And then I got a what was then a postdoc um, at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which is an entrepreneurial postdoc called Cyclotron Road, and now it's called Activate, which was funded by the Department of Energy's Advanced Manufacturing Office and gave us a lab space up at Berkeley Lab in the Bay Area. And that was critical because we had, not even close to a technology that was ready for investment, nor did we have enough money to get in the lab, but we needed the lab space. So that program was really, really critical. And then through the mentoring and networking associated with that program, Activate, we were able to meet a lot of venture capitalists. And eventually our technology got mature enough where it was ready for venture capitalists. And we started, we kind of had a strategy there, was like, okay, if we're going to work on one of the largest problems and most expensive problems to work on in the world, then we need some folks with really, really deep pockets. So we really targeted a firm called Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is sort of Bill Gates and all of his richest friends, I like to say, who are quite rich, who are concerned about climate. And they funded us with some seed funding, and that was, the first money. I think everyone else says the first money was the hardest. I think we went through like 9 months of diligence for a relatively small check. And then after that, we made quite a few technical milestones, built a flow sheet, modeled that flow sheet and, chemical engineering software, built out a team, and we were able to demonstrate enough to convince ourselves and then ultimately venture capitalists that our process had a reasonable shot of being, economical at scale. And so we were able to then raise relatively quickly our Series A, which we raised about a year ago now, or a little bit more, which was substantially larger, as like the lion's share of that $60 million. And and that's actually, providing us a war chest for quite some time. So we're not actually currently fundraising. So this certainly there's been some interest from this announcement from venture capitalists, and which we appreciate, and we're in some conversations, but it's not a huge urgent goal for us to fundraise right now. I think there's several more milestones yet to come that we can do with our financing before we necessarily need to raise.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting. Usually by the time people get to these big milestones, they're running on empty, right? So they're looking for that next check, but that's really a good position to be in. Okay, very cool. This is interesting. So what should I ask next? One thing I want to understand is, so this, I think this was already talked about, but just to clarify, this process is completely different. So this is not something that other plants can be retrofitted to do, correct? This has to be a completely brand new build, or totally like swap out the equipment.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no set rules in this world, but I would be surprised if it made economic sense to retrofit a cement plant basically with anything. And I've actually got an interesting story about that. So first of all, I should say, like, there are, a lot of the equipment, we use it differently, but we still use the same equipment. So you probably could retrofit an existing cement plant. In order to minimize costs, cement plants sit on top of their quarries, and we would do the same thing. And we quarry a different rock, right? We don't quarry a rock which has CO2 in it. So that would already be a challenge. You'd have to ship in the rock, which would add a lot of cost. So it wouldn't make a lot of sense to retrofit it, even though you could. And then the more important question is, like, is retrofitting in general a good strategy? And one of the things that we've learned from the cement industry is that cement plants are very rarely retrofit. Once you turn the thing on, it prints money, right? So turning it off is a really bad proposition unless you can save an enormous amount of money. And it is hard to imagine being able to save a lot, the amount of money that's required in order to turn a cement plant off for a lengthy amount of time. And that really comes down to thermodynamics. right? Because the amount of energy that is consumed to make cement in the conventional process is very, very close to the minimum of energy that's thermodynamically allowed to use, right? You'd have to break a law of physics in order to use less energy. So there just is not that much room for cost savings in a conventional cement plant, and therefore these facilities are pretty rarely retrofitted, because and when they are retrofitted, they try to retrofit them without turning the plant off, which means the retrofit takes a really, really long time. So we're looking at there's a few carbon capture and sequestration projects that are retrofits, and the timelines for building those are like 10 years. Whereas a new build cement plant is 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
And the reason for that is they don't want to shut the plant off, right? That's how they make money in their business. So, especially for something like CCS, which would, unless there's a sizable subsidy structure or something like that, would add costs and make it more expensive. So anyway, retrofits, I think, are a slow way to go compared to new builds. So there's a lot of reasons why we wouldn't want to retrofit, although probably technically could.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a good point to note because there's a lot of companies trying to build carbon capture solutions, and it's something worth considering, right? Like that's getting to the point where like, okay, this is like trying to build a nuclear plant right now. Like it's not gonna happen, kind of thing, or it could, but it's over a substantial amount of time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like an interesting challenge to tackle on another show. But one thing I did want to talk about, which is you said you use a different type of rock. So people are always concerned about like, hey, we're gonna run out of lithium and all these different things. What is the abundance of this and where is it found? Let's talk about, kind of where in the world it's found, if it's not everywhere, and then in particular in the US, if there's specific deposits of it.
Yeah. So this rock in general, calcium silicate rocks in general, they make up about 50% of the rocks in the Earth's crust. So now on the surface, like the easiest ones to mine, it's much less than that, just like limestone, but it's a similar amount of rock, like similar to limestone, which is like how much there is on the surface. So there really is, and if you look up like the availability of limestone, like the USGS's database, the availability is stated as virtually limitless. Right? So we are in the virtually limitless category of rock. So we are, I think that the sun will consume the earth long before we run out of silicate rocks to make cement out of. So yeah, that is not a concern. Our major concerns are more along the lines of, dang, we're going to need a lot of money to scale, and we're going to need, in order to get that money, we're probably going to need things like advanced market commitments, right? So like a contract to purchase the cement, and then you get into the world of, well, okay, well, where is cement purchased? And it turns out that the federal government purchases like 50% or more of all the cement. And at this time, they don't do advanced market commitments. So there's like those sorts of problems that like a startup has, but a big company maybe doesn't, because a big company has a lot of collateral that they can get loans from banks from, or they can also sell equity on the public market. But a small company, we don't have access to banks, and because we're a higher risk process. So those are the things that concern us a lot more than the availability of rock.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. What I want to ask one quick question on is a lot of people have worked with corporates, especially when they're going into like a heavy industry space. Do you have any corporate VC partners or corporates that have kind of invested, or maybe are the LPs in particular of Breakthrough Energy Ventures a lot of corporates that have other, intros that can make you in partnerships they can work with you on?
Yeah, so two come to mind directly. So the first is Amazon Climate Pledge. So they consume a lot of cement to build all of their buildings, their fulfillment centers, data centers, everything else. So that they've been a really great investor for us in that way. And then Fifth Wall, they are a real estate development focused fund. I think their LPs, or like Fifth Wall's investors, represent like a third of the world's built environment or something like that. So they've been really awesome in um, in helping us figure out the commercial side also. So yeah, we've been lucky with some really helpful investors. We're really appreciative.
That's good. I think it's interesting to have the right partners. What one broad question about the concrete space in general would be, are the people, you mentioned there's a lot of different like capex to change things and do things, but are they generally like fascinated to try to make cleaner concrete, or how do you find the receptiveness of the industry?
Yeah, so I don't know too many folks that want to buy more expensive concrete, but I do know a lot of folks that want to buy clean concrete. So basically how it goes is um, if you can make the same material at a lower price point without the CO2 emissions, or even at the same price point without the CO2 emissions, that's a huge win. If it's a penny more expensive, it's not a win. At least it's not a win for the world cement industry. There certainly will be customers that are willing to spend more to be early adopters because they want the material now. They don't want it in 20 years or 10 years or 5 years or whatever however far down the line they are or wherever the cement plant is. But they do, yeah, it's only a win in jet like for the masses we find is if it's also lower cost.
Okay. So let's go on to the final section here before we run out of time on kind of advice to founders. Um, I think what I'd be curious to have you, because it seems like maybe obviously this is in retrospect, it seems clear cut. Obviously, it wasn't at the time, but when you look back, how would you advise other founders doing something that's totally new science on how to visualize the buckets and how to kind of bucket the times and phases they have to go through from idea to principal things? Like, how would you divide those out? And let's make it really clear for other really like deep tech founders who are looking to do something in the space.
Yeah, so I think that I think this is like almost trite at this point, but the most important thing is being willing to pivot, because the process that you developed in your head probably is awful, right? And you're and you need to be willing to like let go of your favorite scientific discovery because you think it's not actually doesn't actually make any economic sense, and instead do something else. So that's sort of overarching. The second thing is um, remember like try to assess the likelihood of the outcome. So we're all trying to build businesses here, and you're not going to change the world or solve a climate problem or whatever if your business doesn't go anywhere. So you want, and like how you could try to calculate, you can try to calculate the likelihood of the outcome with like an expected value calculation, where it's like, okay, the my business could be this big and this is the risk associated with it, and therefore the expected value of my business is 0.1 times a trillion or whatever it is, which is still quite a big business. But what the really clear piece of advice there is like when you're looking at the risk associated with your business, to ask yourself how much of that risk you can control, right? One of the things that we said is it'd be really nice if clean electricity was everywhere and free, or everywhere in 1 cent, right? Or 24 hours a day, or all these sorts of things. But I can't control that. So if my process isn't clean or isn't cheaper, unless clean electricity gets to 1 cent and 24 hours a day, then that's a really, really big risk term in your expected value calculation. And if your process can avoid that risk term, then you're much more likely to have an impact. And there's lots of, besides cost of electricity and that sort of thing, there's lots of potential risk terms. Like basically, do I need another technology to scale before I can scale my technology? And if so, why am I not working on that other technology? Like that's like a you find that you have to work on another technology and you don't know how to, and you should probably change. You should probably pivot, right? You should probably change to a different technology, because just when you have to compound these risk factors, things are really bad. I would say the same thing with like if your business involves like, well, if we had a $150 per ton or $200 per ton or even $100 per ton carbon tax, then the business could be great. It was like, well, how long are we going to have that for? When are we going to have that? these things are, quite risky and unpredictable. So the chances of your business actually making an impact go down if it requires that.
Yeah, that's something I was just arguing with somebody on LinkedIn today about. So I think it's fascinating you bring it up the same day. But one thing I'm curious about is advice to especially people who are more oriented towards science and technology. What is your advice on choosing either a co-founder or founding team to help you kind of go on those early days?
Yeah. So for me, my co-founder, Hugo, he's amazing, right? I feel incredibly lucky to be able to work with him. Um, and so I think I don't think I could have done it alone, right? I just don't think I have the skills. Um, so like my advice would be like, try to find a co-founder who has complementary skills to you, right? So if you're like me and you're, have a really strong background in the sciences but maybe you're a little scattered, like try to find someone like Hugo, who's incredibly organized, is more of an engineer than a scientist, right? Like these are um, like, trying to have less redundant skills or fewer redundant skills is like a great thing for a co-founding team, I think, because it just means like it just makes the roles a lot clearer, and then you don't you don't really butt heads. And then the second thing is like try to work with someone who you like. Like Hugh was one of my best friends, and that's you know like that's huge for like the strength of our relationship like carries us through like times when we disagree, and there will be times when you disagree or anything like that. And so it's just like it's amazing to like work with someone you love. It's just like it's I would recommend that.
Okay, amazing. And then what other advice? Obviously, you talked about how the funding process went, but what would your biggest piece of advice to the founders be during the fundraising process, especially at the early stage? And maybe you have particular advice throughout how to go about that, whether that's through grants or VC.
Yeah, so um, I would be open to all kinds of funding. Right? It's gonna take a lot of funding to get anywhere. So yeah, I think that the time to go for venture capital money is when you like look at this and be like, okay, I think that I have something like a business here, right? If you just have like, I have a really interesting lab result, like it's probably too early for venture capital, but it's like, okay, I think I know a way I can make money off of this or solve the problem that I want to solve. Like that would be the time to go for VC. And my advice would be like, be really confident, like do a lot of work ahead of time to understand the economics of your process, right? Dig really deep into techno-economics and try to figure out, what the economics of your process would look at scale, and try to use really, really reasonable assumptions. Um, because the more you can do that, the more confidence venture capitalists will have that they will make money, right? And they need to make money or else they won't give you money because they could give someone else money where they will make money, right? So that's yeah, doing a lot more work than you think you need to on your techno-economics I think is really
Mhm.
helped us.
And then I guess this would be more like a self-reflection type of question is what would you say if you think you can put your finger on it would be the most important factor that has helped you succeed in kind of building this company?
I would actually uh point to like an unrelenting um attitude of if it doesn't work in today's economic assumptions, then the process is not good enough, right? Because that has allowed us to keep our expected values high, right? Because we're not multiplying, risks that we can't control together, um, and that is so, and it also has caused us to like pivot many, 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 many times. Or it's like we realized, oh, like this process is great, except electricity has to be 24 hours a day and clean in 0.1 cents per kilowatt hour. Like, oh, this is great, but we need a $50 per ton carbon tax. Or, oh, this is great, but we just need to ship rock from Hawaii all over the world. Like there's all of these things. They're like, it's not actually great. you know. So and then we'd be like, okay, well, we need to keep thinking. And I think that there are routes to solve a lot of these problems, but a lot of folks will either maybe fool themselves a little bit with assumptions, which is really easy to do because you love what you're doing, you want to do it, or they will assume that assume things that are really risky. So
Mhm. Yeah. Very good. Well, this has been awesome. The last question I have is, how did you come up with the name Brimstone? And was that the original name, or did it get changed along the way?
Yeah, Brimstone is the one thing in the company that has not pivoted. I guess we used to be called Brimstone Energy and we dropped the energy. So it's been the same way. So how that started is we started actually as a co-producing hydrogen, clean hydrogen and sulfuric acid for the fertilizer industry.
Okay.
And we did that from sulfur. And brimstone is an archaic name for sulfur, which is like, as a chemist, I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. And then since then, we've been asked many, many times if we are very religious. And not
That's
really.
actually, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
But I
But
just think it's a great name. But I'm just curious, do
thanks.
a lot of other chemists give you flack for it? Like, hey, that doesn't make any sense now based on what you're doing?
No, they don't. I
uh,
appreciate because we don't use sulfur anymore. But
very nice. Well, it's a cool name and a great marketing as well. So it's been a pleasure to have you on. What's your call to action for people? Where can they reach you?
yeah, so reach out on our website. We've got a form there or on LinkedIn. And like the biggest thing that we're looking for is we need really strong, motivated, hands-on chemical engineers, right? We are building a big facility and we need a lot of folks. So if you're a chemical engineer, please reach out because we would love to talk about working together. And then if you're a policymaker, of course, advanced market commitments.
Let's change it. Let's make it happen, man. This has been great. I'm really excited to see where you guys go. Hopefully to the moon. So this is gonna be great. Can't wait to see.
Well, thanks, Silas. I really appreciate that.